In the previous lesson, what we did was spend some time talking about functionalist explanations for crime and deviance as part of our A-level sociology syllabus. This lesson is going to spend some time talking about Marxist and neo-Marxist explanations of crime, deviance, social order, and social control. This involves looking at a number of different concepts. So we're going to explore specifically Marxist and neo-Marxist explanations, but we're going to include key terminologies such as the idea of criminogenic capitalism, the idea of lawmaking, and then finally thinking about critical criminology. And so generally speaking, if we just begin our understandings of Marxist and neo-Marxist explanations, we can see that from a sort of broad sociological perspective, the viewing of crime, deviance, and criminal activity is seen from a Marxist and neo-Marxist perspective not as individual pathologies or even the result of societal breakdowns, but they see this as the products of social inequalities, the operation of capitalism. So Marxism, rooted in Karl Marx, and neo-Marxism, which builds and updates on these theories, focuses on ideas relating to class structure, power, and economic structures in shaping deviant behavior and the criminal justice system. So central to the Marxist idea about crime is this idea of capitalism, and the view that capitalism inherently produces conditions that foster crime. Now, within this particular conversation, criminogenic capitalism is the concept that the capitalist system itself encourages behaviors that deviate from legal norms, especially because of the exploitation and inequality and alienation that it generates. Marxists believe that capitalist societies are fundamentally divided between the bourgeois, the ruling capitalist class, and the proletariat, the working class. The bourgeois controls the means of production and benefits from the labour of the proletariat. The exploitation of the working class creates the alienation of the proletariat from their labour, and poverty includes this, which can then lead into the idea of criminal behaviour. When, for example, the working class is economically disadvantaged, they resort to crime as a way of trying to achieve the material success or as an outlet for frustration and disenfranchisement. Capitalist emphasis on individualism, on competition, and on material success, similar to things like the American dream that we spoke about in the previous lesson, essentially encourages people to break the law to try and achieve wealth, which contributes to financial-based crimes such as corporate crime, theft, and fraud. So ultimately then, we know about Marxism and how Marxism explains sociological perspectives from an earlier lesson on Marxist theories. And we spoke about the idea of the labour theory of value, that value of products is given by the combination of, or the intermingling of, the basic means of production with the labour of the proletariat, and that the proletariat sell their labour for profit, and that the fact that it is the owners of the means of production who essentially take the excess value of the labour and sell it on for personal wealth and for personal gain. This creates a sense of alienation from one's labour, which in turn creates a sense of class consciousness, and so on and so forth. We get the idea of proletarian revolution and taking over and controlling the means of production. Now, essentially, in relation to this then, capitalism produces deep social inequalities, according to Marxist and neo-Marxist theories. Those at the bottom of the economic ladder will often face limited access to the legitimate means of trying to be able to achieve success. So education is expensive. Jobs are often hard to come by. Opportunities of that nature are difficult to find. As a result, individuals then turn to illegal means, such as theft or drug dealing or whatever, in order to survive or to fulfill material needs. Unequal opportunities and alienation felt by the working class in these capitalist societies contribute to the development of subcultures that begin to embrace deviant behaviors. But it should be noted that capitalism is not just seen as a driver of street-level, low-level crime, but also as the fosterers of corporate and state crime. So, Marxist argues that the capitalist system allows the wealthy and the powerful to be able to break the law with a certain degree of impunity. And we see this all the time. So corporate crimes such as tax evasion or environmental violations or just the exploitation of labour and workers, as well as state crime, the criminal actions of government and law enforcement agencies, will often go unpunished, or at the very least the consequences are mitigated by the wealth and the influence of those who are involved. It shouldn't come as no surprise, therefore, that somebody such as an individual who has been convicted on multiple felony convictions has very recently, at the time of recording, just retaken the most powerful position in the world, the President of the United States. And Marxists essentially contend that corporations and the political elites are more likely to shape the laws to protect their interests, and therefore crimes committed by the powerful are less likely to be prosecuted or even to be punished with the same kind of severity as the crimes that are committed by the poor. Within this structure, then, the role of law is also a very important point of reference. According to Marxist theory, laws in a capitalist society serve the interests of the ruling class and are designed to maintain the power and control of the bourgeois over that of the proletariat. The legal system is not neutral, nor is it objective, but rather it is a tool for social control. Marxists argue that law reflects the interests of the powerful, and laws are constructed to justify and maintain the status quo. Laws criminalize behaviors, and they threaten behaviors that threaten the power and property of the bourgeois. So things like labor strikes, unionization, protests, other forms of resistance are all very heavily criminalized compared to behaviors which harm the working class, such as exploitative practices by corporations. These are things that are often overlooked, or they are often under-criminalized. The criminal justice system, including things like the police, the courts, and the prison system, all are seen as mechanisms for social control, and they are designed to enforce the laws that benefit the ruling class and prevent challenges to the capitalist system. So, an example of this is the prison system. Marxists argue that the prison system disproportionately targets the poor and marginalized groups. Poor and marginalized groups, often groups who are minorities in society, so black and minority ethnic groups, are more likely than others to be arrested, to be charged, and to be incarcerated for crimes, whereas you don't very often see the wealthy getting criminal charges or even incarceration for similar or even for more severe offences. So building on the foundational basis of traditional Marxism, we see that neo-Marxists take a complex and nuanced analysis of crime and deviance, and what they tend to do is incorporate elements from other sociological theories to try and illustrate further explanations for why crime and deviance takes place. So particularly interactionism and labeling theory are often utilized by neo-Marxists. Beginning first then, we can see that neo-Marxists argue that laws are not simply just a tool for ruling classes to maintain powers, but they are also shaped by ideological processes and the struggles between different social groups. So in their view, laws are the result of the conflict of interest between different groups in society. For example, you have the bourgeois, who may have more power and influence in lawmaking, but the working class movements and political organizations, or even activists such as moral entrepreneurs, the sort of key term, can also shape laws as well. So laws around civil rights or environmental protection might be the result of social movements challenging the status quo. So this sort of takes a little bit more of an interesting and complex analysis to the idea of law in crime and deviance, because what it does is it helps to explain examples that some traditional Marxist explanations for law in society might not be able to explain. So, of course, if the legal system only exists to uphold the bourgeois class and to keep the proletariat neutered, essentially, then how do you explain pushing for legal regulation on human rights, on civil rights, on environmental protection, etc., etc.? Well, a neo-Marxist argues that it is something of a dialectical struggle between the bourgeois and the proletariat classes that can help shape laws in a way that might result in social movements challenging the status quo. But laws are not always even uniformly oppressive, but instead reflect the dominance of certain ideologies. So, for example, this can lead to criminalization of some behaviors, such as street crime or protests, while protecting other behaviors, such as corporate practices. One such example of this could be seen when we think about things like the war on drugs and the Southern Strategy in the Nixon administration in the 1960s, 1970s, or even the impact of the war on drugs in the Reagan administration, the ways in which certain dominant ideologies, specifically things like neoliberalism and conservatism and neoconservatism, can lead to the criminalization of some behaviors over other behaviors. An offshoot of neo-Marxist sociology is something known as critical criminology. Critical criminology goes beyond traditional Marxist explanations of crime and deviance, and it helps to try and stress the importance of power relations, and argues that definitions of crime are shaped by interest of the powerful. So a critical criminologist might believe, for example, that crime is not an inherent category, but is instead defined and constructed by social actors who have the power to impose their definitions on others. So these social actors might include the state or even media infrastructure and other institutions that label certain actions as criminal and others as socially acceptable. And we'll get to labeling theory in future videos' time, but just note the kind of interaction between neo-Marxist and traditional Marxist explanations and labeling theory. So, for example, white-collar crime or corporate malpractice might be downplayed or ignored because they serve the interests of powerful groups. And we do certainly see that. People do go to prison for malpractice in corporate law or tax evasion and stuff like that, but it's not seen in the same kind of negative light as something like drug dealing or petty theft. And so it could be particularly because they serve the interest of the more powerful groups. And so within this particular field, the media plays a significant role in the construction of criminality. The media is often seen as reinforcing the interest of the ruling class, particularly when the media is owned by members of the ruling class. It is no surprise, for example, that one of the largest social media platforms in the world is owned by the richest man in the world, or people like Rupert Murdoch, who own a significant amount of media apparatus and organizations, or people like Mark Zuckerberg, who own Facebook and Instagram. All of these are now media organizations, essentially. Through this process, then, certain crimes, such as theft or violence by the poor, can be criminalized and moralized, and the emphasis on morality being placed here, while other forms of crime, such as corporate fraud or government corruption, might still be criminalized at points, and people might still go to prison, but it is not necessarily as heavily moralized, or it is even potentially minimized or even ignored. So, with all this being said, the role of the state is very important to emphasize when thinking about crime and deviance. So neo-Marxists see that the state is a mechanism that is used to maintain the capitalist power. The state reinforces and enforces laws that protects the interests of the ruling class. It instantiates these inequalities, and it instantiates the emphasis on the idea of capitalism and the power of capitalism. It means that the state plays a direct role in the perpetuation of inequality. Neo-Marxists will emphasize that the state is not a monolithic entity, but it is instead subjected to conflict and contestation. So, for example, the state may serve capitalist interests, should I say, but it is also influenced by working class struggles, social movements, and other forces that may challenge the system. And so the system does get challenged, and there are different ways in which legal reform that presents a benefit to working class groups. That these reforms do sometimes happen. This might be on things like rent and regulation of landlords. It might be on union rights. It might be on environmental rights. It might be just on human rights at a basic level. Luis Althusser is also another individual. Luis, should I say? Althusser is an individual who, a neo-Marxist theorist, who argued that the state operates essentially in two ways, and he describes this. They describe this through the types of apparatus. So you have, for example, repressive state apparatus, or the RSA. RSA includes institutions like the police, the military, and the courts. And the purpose of the RSA is to enforce laws and to use coercion or violence to suppress deviance and to maintain social order. By contrast, then, you also have ideological state apparatus, the ISA. This includes institutions like school, the media, and religious organizations. These help shape the values and beliefs of individuals, which helps them to align with the interest of the ruling class without the need of direct coercion. So the idea of repressive state apparatus and ideological state apparatus essentially can divide the idea of state control, which is direct, so the use of law enforcement, the military, the police, the courts, and things that are indirect, that are ideological, that allow for you to essentially shape the values and beliefs of individuals. And so according to Althusser, crime and deviance are not simply punished by the state, but they are instead also shaped by ideological processes that define what criminal activity is, what is decided to be criminal, and what is decided to be deviant. And then in this sense, therefore, both coercive and ideological state functions are essential for maintaining this capitalist system. So ultimately then, Marxism and neo-Marxist theories of crime and deviance provides critical frameworks for understanding such phenomenon, while Marxism emphasizes that crime is the product of criminogenic capitalism and the exploitation and alienation that arises from it. It also views the legal system as a mechanism of social control. By contrast, neo-Marxism builds on these ideas by incorporating the ideas from critical criminology, and focuses on the construction of criminality, the idea of lawmaking, as well as the role of ideology and the state in the maintaining of capitalist power.